In 2025, the X-59 Quiet SuperSonic Technology aircraft transitioned from an engineering marvel on the ground into a living flight test program, marking one of the most consequential years in the history of supersonic aviation. Developed by NASA in partnership with Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, the X-59 is not a conventional research aircraft. It was designed for one singular, disruptive purpose: to prove that supersonic flight over land can be made quiet enough for everyday use. And in 2025, the project finally crossed the threshold from theory to reality. The year began with intense system-level ground testing at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Engineers methodically powered up the aircraft's avionics, flight computers, and control laws, validating that the X-59's highly unusual configuration behaved exactly as simulations predicted. With its razor-thin fuselage, elongated nose stretching over 38 feet ahead of the cockpit, and a single top-mounted engine carefully shaped to manage shockwaves, there was no margin for assumption. Everything had to be proven. One of the most critical milestones in early 2025 involved the aircraft's external vision system, or XVS. Because the pilot cannot see forward through a traditional windshield, the nose is simply too long. NASA relies on a high-resolution camera system, feeding a real-time image to a cockpit display. Throughout 2025, this system underwent rigorous validation, confirming that pilots could safely taxi, line up, and fly the aircraft using a purely digital forward view. It was a quiet but historic shift in how humans interact with aircraft. By mid-year, the X-59 moved into low-speed and high-speed taxi tests. These runs were not about speed records or spectacle. They were about trust. Engineers monitored how the aircraft tracked the runway, how the landing gear responded, how the flight controls behaved as aerodynamic forces began to build. Each successful taxi run in 2025 inched the program closer to a moment aviation had been waiting on for decades. Behind the scenes, NASA teams were also preparing for what comes after first flight. The X-59 is the centerpiece of NASA's Quest mission, which will eventually fly the aircraft over select U.S. communities to collect real-world data on human response to low-level sonic thumps. Throughout 2025, planning accelerated, instrumentation, acoustic modeling, and community engagement frameworks were refined, all hinging on one prerequisite: the aircraft had to fly. Then, late in 2025, it finally happened. The X-59 took to the sky for the very first time. The inaugural flight was deliberately conservative, focused on basic airworthiness and handling qualities. There were no supersonic speeds, no shockwave experiments, just a clean departure from Edwards Air Force Base and a controlled return. Yet that moment represented something far larger than a single test flight. It marked the rebirth of a capability the world had effectively abandoned since the Concorde era: the possibility of quiet, practical supersonic travel over land. By the end of 2025, the X-59 was no longer a promise on paper or a striking silhouette in a hangar. It was a flying aircraft, one that had begun the final journey toward reshaping how fast humanity moves across the planet. And this is only the beginning. As the X-59 continues its flight test program and moves towards supersonic missions over real communities, we'll be there to cover every milestone, every breakthrough, and every moment that could change aviation forever. Subscribe to @BeyondEarth Buckle Up for accurate, fast-paced stories from the front edge of space and flight, and stay buckled up for what comes next.